Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wet plate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wet plate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silver bath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 questions. In this episode, I've asked a photographer who fell into the process because someone left their gear at his house before leaving the country. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty good gift to leave someone. When I listen to him talk about his love of wet plate, I hear many similarities with not only my own experience, but that of many others that are really enamored with the creation of an image through just the right combination of chemicals, light, and skill. Based in Oceanside, California, I'd like to welcome Conrad Young to 10 Questions.
Hey, Chad, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we've not had the opportunity to meet, and I look forward to learning a little bit more about you and how your creative juices get going with the wet plate process.
Wonderful, wonderful.
You started off shooting black and white film in the mid-90s, and you spent some time working in a portrait studio, and then you actually ended up going to film school. So you've got a lot of background in this process. During that time, had you ever even heard about wet plate collodion?
I had I'd always seen and looked at the old traditional forms of landscape photography, and that is what really had moved me with photography, was just seeing what was old. And one day, at the time I was doing a lot of commercial work and digital work. It was actually my day I was getting married. My nephew got up on my desk and knocked over all my hard drives, and I was lost 10 years of photography.
Wow.
And I thought I had them all backed up on discs, and because that's what we were supposed to do back then, and all those discs were bad. So I had to figure a way to make tangible photography, because in the digital world, everything was just on a disc, on a drive, on whatever. And I, at the time, was doing a couple little art shows, and I met a guy named Tim in the Los Rios district of San Juan. And he actually had been doing wet plate since 2000. And right now he's Vital Actions on Instagram. But he and I started talking. He's like, I got to learn this process. It's amazing. He's like, yeah, dude, someday I'll teach you. I'm like, okay. And then he ended up going to Nicaragua to save sea turtles, because he went on a surf trip and saw that people were actually eating all the eggs, and he wanted to save the turtles. So he showed up at my house one day with his van and left 2 boxes full of camera gear, like chemicals, an 8x10 camera, a couple lenses, and says, hey, take care of this stuff for me. I might or might not come back. I'm like, okay, cool. And that camera and chemicals sat in my attic for about 5 years. And I thought about it every day. I'm like, I got to learn this wet plate. Like, what is this beautiful process that he showed me? Like, how can I do it? And I'm more of a learner where you got to show me something, or I have to watch it to really grasp it.
Sure.
And I started looking around, and I reached out to Will Dunaway, because he lived an hour north of me, and took his first wet plate workshop after his heart attack. So he and I started talking for about 6 months, and he goes, okay, here's the price. I'm like, dude, I can't afford that. He goes, okay, well, why don't you find 6 people and I'll knock it down to a more affordable price.
Right.
And so I said, great, not a problem. I started calling all my friends who were all, commercial photographers, wedding photographers, portrait photographers, all over the country. And everyone's like, dude, you're crazy. Like, why would I don't have time for that. And I'm like, okay. And I called Will. I'm like, Will, I can't find anybody. And I sat there, I go, give me your email list of everybody who's ever not taken a class with you.
So you kind of turned into his marketing guy almost.
Yes, exactly. I turned into the marketing guy. Within 2 days, I had 6 people signed up for the wetplate class.
Nice.
And this was 8 years ago, and I took that workshop in February with Anne Riviera, who's a cup full of sunshine, and my buddy Rhett, and a bunch of other people who I met, and those are the 2 people who I keep in contact with. And after that class, like as soon as that first plate was poured, I was hooked. I'm like, dude, this is all I'm ever gonna do. And
yep.
I'm sure you felt that same way, and everyone listening, it's like, you just know it. It's like, this is all I'm like, what's photography beside this? Like just that ether, Will would always tell us, like, collodion's a mistress, and sometimes she's real good to you and sometimes she can be real bad, but you got to go with both of them, and I started shooting like 50 plates a week and just, so involved with it, and, just kept going and going and going and going and didn't stop.
So it sounds like you were at least familiar with the process. Do you remember what it was that really kind of kicked off your interest in, I really want to learn something about that. Was it your buddy who was doing this type of photography, or had you seen it before and had an interest? I mean, so some people get into it because of the kind of the historical aspect, and others are really just interested in the aesthetic of it. I mean, what was it that kind of led you into it?
It was just the pictures of like the old landscapes, like I mean, as a kid, you see like in history books, all like the Civil War pictures, and I really didn't realize that was wet plate until like I made a couple portraits. I'm like, oh, that's what it was. That's how, like I really was just there, like seeing the gorgeous landscapes, like the depth of field in them, like. And then I remember in a film history class or photography history class, one of the teachers saying, look, if you look at this landscape, everything is in focus from 1 foot out of the lens all the way to infinity. She goes, this is 35 millimeter. This was before digital. She goes, can you get that with a 35 millimeter? Right. And I swear I tried for 5 years and I didn't understand that, your cameras can have, tilts, swings, and, it just.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you start playing with that with landscape. It's like, holy cow, this is amazing, and landscape has always been my love with photography, and portraits is always my second love with photography. But like, I've always just shot people and, fun things, but it's always, it's the spot where you're able to be out there and capture something that a million other people could capture, but to be able to put your own personal eye and what you're feeling and looking at into that and make something completely different is what's always intrigued me,
Yeah. Tell me about the very first plate that you were able to make. Did you do that with your friend, or was that something that you did with Will in kind of the introductory class? How did that process go?
So that was with Will. And I remembered, like, always hearing, like, wet plate, photography steals your soul, and we were sitting out there and it was an 8-second exposure. And I was just sitting there. I'm like, holy cow, this is what they're talking about, because like in film, if you're shooting a movie, it's 24 frames a second. And I'm sitting there for 8 seconds and doing the math. I'm like, holy cow, that's a couple of feet of film right there in this one picture.
Yeah.
And I sit there, and then all of a sudden the fix, we pulled out the KCN, and the fix, the picture comes to life. I'm like, that's what they're talking about, stealing your soul. Like that whole watching that image come up. It was amazing, like just how, that's what got me right there. And every time to this day, every time I drop it in the fix, I'm saying, like, is it going to work? And I feel that same magical feeling I did 8 years ago.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I mean, I've not gotten to the point, I don't know that I ever will, of being so confident that I know exactly what the image is going to look like. And I tell folks that come in here is that, hey, you never know what you're going to get with this process until it comes out of that fix, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even after it comes out of the fix, it's like, it's going to dry up a little bit, and then you varnish, but it's like, so it's like, even there, it's still such a delicate thing. I was doing a portrait of my friends in Central California, and I've been running out of varnish, and I went to varnish the plate, and it was an 8x10, and there was too much alcohol, or not enough alcohol. It had all evaporated out, and when I poured the plate, their face just went black, like to varnish it. I'm like, oh crap!
Yep.
And like that was about 6 years ago, and it broke my heart. I'm like, oh no, that's like, so like it's still a delicate process, even until it's in someone's hand. That's when I'm relieved, and okay, there's the box, take it away.
Yep.
And then a piece of my heart is there, and I really have a hard time giving my portraits to the people after I've taken their portrait, because I no longer will see that image. It's no longer, it's something I created, but it's now on, their mantle, and, it's lost to the, wherever it goes,
Right. Yep.
and, and sometimes I'm good at writing my name on the back or putting my stickers on the back, and other times I'm not, and who knows, 100 years down the line, if someone sees this picture, it's like, oh, I wonder who did that. And then, I get worried about, like, what's the proper way to, like, because before they had union cases, they had, mats to put everything in. And now it's like people are going, well, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm like, well, you can frame it, like if you don't, I can't.
Do you do a kind of a scan before varnishing just so you've got record of it?
I'd say about 70%, 60% sometimes. Like if I'm in my studio at home, 100%. But when I'm on the road, I don't ever see them again. Like, I'm lucky if I have time to get an actual iPhone picture of them.
Right.
Because like I'll do like 55 plates in about 4.5, 5 hours, and then about an hour of varnishing for all of them.
Wow. What size plates for that many?
5x7.
5x7s. That's amazing. I mean, that is having your workflow down there to crank through that many.
It's myself and my assistant Ben, and he's just running through the plates, rinsing them out and keeping people moving to the chairs when we're doing these parties and events.
Right.
But it's I don't know, that's another reason why I think I guess this month I've been looking like what is really what moves me with photography, and I think that's kind of like the landscapes and the art side of it are more, and not that portrait's not art, but like, to do the art for yourself. And I think that's why I love landscapes so much, because it's usually, for me or someone else or whatever, but it's not like a rushed thing. It's more slow,
Yeah.
What got you into wet plate work?
So my father is a big Civil War scholar, right? And he has this huge library at his house in Indiana. We would go there during the holidays, and probably back in 2015, or so, I just got to looking through these old books of Civil War pictures and was
Yeah.
just intrigued with, how in the world did they do this back then? I mean, I had seen tintypes, but I didn't really think about what all was involved with this. I mean, if you go see a battlefield photograph, what how did they even do that? So it just kind of, that historical aspect kind of drove me into the process and doing a bunch of research and, probably like everybody else today, watching a lot of YouTube videos and those kind of things. And I just took it in my mind that, hey, you know what, I can figure this out, how to do this. So
Yeah. It's an amazing little thing we do. I feel blessed every day to think, like, wow, like I feel like we're able to hold on to that history, like without, like, because before that, like, you're shooting digital cameras or film cameras, but even I think everything was lost in the digital world, really.
yeah,
Like where there's such a separation. I mean, and don't get me wrong, people who are digital photographers are amazing. You know what I'm saying? Like they are great photographers and they can do stuff we can't do.
exactly. Yep.
But like
Not demeaning that at all, for sure.
no. It's just such a weird, like what we do is such a weird thing that we would, be covered in silver nitrate all the time. Like, be breathing in fumes that we don't, it's one of those love. It's a labor of love, really, like for everyone, like whatever media photography you're doing or art or whatever, like it's part of expressing yourself into that piece of art.
So do you have maybe a favorite photo or series that you've taken?
Yes. So, I went out with Chris Burkhardt, and the job was for Travel Lodge and the national parks. And it was kind of a thing of like following Ansel Adams' footsteps. And we were um, shooting out at Canyon de Chelly on the Navajo lands. And then
Wow.
it was really cool because like my buddy Milo Fowler, he was there and he's Dene. And Chris and his whole crew was there. And they're doing their whole digital shoot, and I'm just sitting there making wet plates, and everyone just stopped. They're all like, there's a whole production company, and I'm just doing wet plates, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is cool. And then we got the whole production done. So being there at Spider Rock in Canyon de Chelly and watching the sunrise on one of the Navajo's most sacred sites was just amazing. Like it just watching that sun just peek over the mountains. And this is where
This is Curtis, where Curtis was at, right?
Well, yes. Yes. It was Curtis was there, Ansel Adams was there. But this is also where like the cavalry chased the Navajo people into this canyon, and they were starving them out of water. Hmm. And the people had to like tie ropes and crawl down to the river. And one of the guides there said that they actually made a human chain and held each other's hands and got down to get to the water, and then bucketed it back up to everyone else on top of the mountain.
Wow.
But anyway, at that moment, like there's these in the White House ruins, those are all Anasazi ruins. And it's, 10,000-year-old ruins. And the feelings there are so amazing, like just such a spiritual place. And it's such a, like, you can just feel like the history there. You can feel the generations before there. And I remember just taking this portrait. I'm like, man, like 10,000 years ago, these people who, all they would do is their traditional ways and, let's eat, let's, hunt, let's pray. And that's all they did. And I don't know, I'm just saying that, sorry, that's kind of, they'd live their lives there.
Right.
Without anything modern that we know. And just being there to be able to take a portrait with a process that's 150 years old was just amazing. Like it was. And then from there, after that shoot, 2 days later, I was up in Yosemite at Will Dunaway's house, and I made some of my most favorite wet plates of Yosemite, and also just that whole week was just an encompassing 4 days of national park, 4 different national parks in 1 week,
Wow.
and it was just a whirlwind trip. It's one of those, like, being on the road and shooting, and then doing portraits when I got home. So it's like, I mean, I'll do, like, you know, sometimes one, sometimes two, three, four, five portraits a week, different sessions, and just all trying to be all over the place. And sometimes I feel too, like the balance isn't quite there. It's like not enough time to, go out and, what I'm saying? Like, just when you're on working constantly, it's.
I mean, it to me, it sounds like you prefer to be in that natural setting and trying to capture that majesty and beauty that's in the land, right?
Yes, but then also when I'm working in studio or in the land doing a portrait, it's the same way. Like, it's a more microcosmic or cosm of that one person is just as special as that grand mountain or that famous person or whatever. Everyone I shoot, I feel, is that magic moment at that time.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm with my camera, it's because it's an extension of me. Like, I kind of have a joke when people are walking by and they walk by with a mirrorless camera. I'm like, hey, I got a mirrorless camera. And they're like, what? And I open up the back. I'm like, see, that's an original mirrorless, and they're like, oh, that's not that funny. You're kind of weird. I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm weird in my own head, and walk away to the next person. But it's actually just a spark, because then they're like, oh, wow, that's neat. I've never seen a camera like that before, or like, that's a weird camera, and anyway.
So speaking of sitters, what does your kind of typical interaction look like with your sitters when you have them in your studio?
So my studio is my garage, and I've turned it into like a pretty nice studio. They come in, and I have my darkroom bus outside, which is my darkroom. And if they want to, they can come in. We pour the plate. I sit them down, make an exposure if it's in studio or out in the courtyard for natural light studio. And then they watch the everything come to life, and then we'll sit for about like an hour with them and make a couple plates, sometime depending on how many they want to buy, and then I'll tell them to go get some coffee or go get lunch and let the plates dry and varnish them, and then they get them.
Yeah, to me, that's probably one of my favorite parts of the process, is just being able to share that creation of that image with somebody that's never seen it before. And it's, if you haven't seen it, it is somewhat magical, right? To think that the only technology that's involved with that is really chemistry and light, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because, like, when you pour the collodion on that plate, the bromides, when they react with that silver nitrate, it's actually creating a silver crystal. So that light we're using crystals to capture, that light, and so it's even a more of a organic feel, like, or cosmic feel, like you said, like a something special. You know what I'm saying, though? It's such there's so much going on that I barely even understand. Like, you listen to, like, Olserman talk about it, and it's like, he gets all, like, deep into it, and that it's just amazing just how much chemistry and science that we barely understand. And what I mean, and I still trip out when people are like, how did they get that 150 years ago? I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's a
It's like the guy that stumbled onto this. It's like, did he really know what was going on, or did he just get lucky?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because, like, you look at the developer we use, and that's what they were using in the Revolutionary War for hidden messages. They'd put, like, lemon juice on the iron, and then it would show itself, or acetic acid on it, and it would things would be shown, and that's, I think, how they figured out that let's try this to develop something.
Yeah. You mentioned your studio is in your garage. You've got a. It sounds like your darkroom is actually mobile, right?
Yeah.
It's in a van. So tell a little bit about that. I mean, how does that's got to be handy whenever you're shooting landscapes and on location. And I know that one of the things that I hate the most is trying to load up everything that I need to go to somewhere else to shoot outside of my studio, and being able to have something mobile like that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So when Luther moved to Connecticut, I bought his bus from him, and he sold it to me, and this is what he was making his 24 by 36-inch plates. And I mean, it's a shuttle bus that has the back. There's two bunk beds in it, two seats, and the rest is all dark room. And I'm in it every day. The problem is, like, driving, it gets 8 miles to the gallon. So it has to be a special purpose for me to drive that somewhere,
Right.
or and it's great because I get the best night's sleeps ever in the bus because of just the I don't know if it's the ether in there or whatever, but I've always been. It's a very comfortable bus to ride, and but it gets scary when it gets windy and I'm out like on the 15 freeway and it's 60-mile-an-hour winds. It's a it can be very it's a very scary bus to drive sometimes, but it's worth it and I love it. And
I love the smell of ether. I don't know what it is about it. I mean, I
yeah,
know some people that's like a huge turnoff. I have folks that come back into the dark room, and I typically don't have a ventilation fan that's running, but if I can kind of sense that they're a little sensitive to it, then I'll kick that fan on. But myself, just for normal work in the dark room, I love the smell of that. I love the lavender and the varnish, the Sandorak
yeah,
varnish that I use. I mean, it's very relaxing.
yes it is, yes it is. I mean it. Last October, I had a job where I was using one of the Eskimo tents, and I did made 45 plates, and the last three plates it wasn't venting very well. My fan wasn't it broke, and I got so sick. I was just like, man, this ether is I got to stop. And people still wanted pictures. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And that was like the first time like I had to turn people away and just stop because it was and then I went and bought two more fans to make sure I never broke a fan again. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's about the redundancy. Like everything you have to have. Like when I'm on the road, like my whole minivan is completely full of stuff. Like even if I don't need it, I'm still bringing like powdered Sandorak just in case I need to make more varnish in case a bottle breaks because you never know. Like I don't know if you've read Henry Jackson's book Time Exposure.
I have not.
Um, oh, you got to read it. It's an amazing book. But what he talks about in there is they went on a trip, and he was starting to use the dry plate process before. It was like a pre-dry plate, and they didn't develop anything. And when he came home, everything was ruined. And that entire summer, nothing worked. And he goes, if I would have just had my wet plate gear, I would have known that it was working.
Right.
He also lost like a bunch of plates that fell off the back of one of his donkeys once, and all the glass plates shattered.
Sounds like my kind of
But
luck. I'll have to check that out.
yeah, but I mean, I would highly recommend that book to anyone who is in this because this guy, he lived to be almost. I think he was 95 when he died in 1940s, and he was like the landscape guy. He was out there, and also a portrait photographer. He was back in the day. He was making amazing amounts of money doing portraits. So it's always you know that's kind of like that what I was talking about earlier. That the look back, like what worked then, it's still going to work today.
Right. With
But
with your studio being in your garage, do you do much natural light photography, or do you still use strobes or other constant light sources?
so I use Speedotron 48 OCs,
Okay.
and I use three lights, a hair key fill, and then sometimes I'll just like I use a beauty dish, and then I have a 3 foot softbox, or just the dishes. And I also have a 5 foot by 5 foot softbox I'll use sometimes to make actual soft light, because a beauty dish is not soft. Um, and then when I'm in the courtyard, I have my easy up that I'll pop up, or just set up a couple scrims, put people by trees, whatever.
Yep.
But it's really much what they want. Like a lot of people really love the studio look. A lot of people really love the natural light look. It a lot of times with women, I'll use natural light. That's something Will would always like yell at me at, like, or not yell, but go like, man, these studio things ugly. It's not real light. God loves the light, and that's the light we use. God's light. Don't bother him. And I'd be like, well, I'm working at midnight. I'm working at 2 in the morning. At like, I can't be, only working at that time. And but that. Sorry, I'm kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have access to natural light all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, my studio is at my house. It's in my basement, so I'm kind of forced into having to figure out the light sources, right? And I've moved along from different things over the years. I'm using a couple of speedotrons myself, but yeah, the aesthetic from natural light, it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, I mean, but then also too, like the speed, like the strobes give such good contrast that it's hard. You can see it in the really old. Like I have a lot of old ambrotypes, and um, the amount of contrast in them, I'd look at them like, man, I've never gotten a picture that looks that good. And just because they were on such a totally different level. They were like having 5 people working. It wasn't like where we're just like, hey, I'm this weird artist, and in my garage, or in my basement, or in my studio, wherever. They actually had like a chemist working who was making sure the silver was perfect every shot, the retoucher, the photographer. Like it's a lot. It was a lot different, and they were doing so much work back then.
Let's switch over and talk about your photographic gear. So concerning wet plate, what kind of gear did you start out with versus maybe what you use today? Have you went through kind of an upgrade process from where you started, or what's that path been?
So here's a fun story. The portrait studio I worked at in Laguna Beach, it was, we were doing all portraits, and it was Don Romero and his son Jay, and my buddy Jay, who's like one of my best friends. He decided like to move up to Oregon, and his digital camera broke, and I had just upgraded a digital camera, and this is the same time after Tim had dropped off stuff, and I'm like, I need a good camera. I need a camera to do wet plate with. That's not an 8x10, because that's too big.
Yep. For starting off, for sure.
For starting off, yeah. And like he's like, I mean, if you want to start off with an 8x10, go ahead. I mean, but he told me, he's like, I really need a camera. I'm like, okay, well, I'll trade you my D600 with 2 lenses and 2 flashes for this Kodak 2D you have. It's a 5x7, and his mom had actually found that in it was from a New York studio from the 40s, and this thing still has original bellows,
right?
And I don't know how old it is. It could have been 20. Like I tell everyone it's 1909. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like,
but it sounds like, I mean, I've got a Eastman 2D that I use. That's my typical shooter, right? Mm-hmm. And from what I've been able to find out, it's an 8x10, and they only made that model from about 1912 until about 1920. So I always say it's at least 100-year-old camera.
Yes, and I thank you. That's good to know that that's that year. I've always, but the lenses I have, I still use that camera to this day. I had a wet plate back made for it, and that's my go-to everyday camera. I have the lens I use today at pretty much every shoot is a Voigtlander 4A.
Okay.
And then I was at a pop up, it was it was called the Redo Festival, and some guy walked up to me and sold me a Dallmeyer 4D for $300.
Wow.
He's like, "Hey, you want to buy this lens? It looks just like the lens you have on your camera." I'm like, "Yep, let's do it." Um,
Nice.
and then I have a 1860s Jamandar lot that Will sold me, and those are my three lenses I use for portraiture. And then landscape, I have um, a lot of different lenses. I have my 8x10 Williams. I have my like some lenses from Paris. Like I don't even know what they are. It's like Swiss lens, like just a bunch of little rapid rec linears.
Yeah.
And I love those, and I use those in portraiture work too when there's a lot of people. They're great lenses. Um,
Are there any upgrades that you've got in mind? I mean,
um,
are you, I look at my camera and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is a 100-year-old camera, and I'm sure it's probably a little shaky, it's a little loose, right? And if I was to invest in something new, I could probably spot on focus and just have much more in the way of adjustment. But I don't know, there's just something about that camera. I love it just because it's old.
well, I have an old stereo camera that I bought from Will years ago. It was kind of cool. Like, so the week before the whole COVID thing happened, I stopped by Cassandra's CSA, Kat, down her studio in Old Town San Diego. And me and my boys, we'd been camping all week, and she made a stereograph of us. And I looked at that going, holy cow, this is like the coolest camera ever. This is the coolest image. Like this image, like it was like me and my boys and my wife and my daughter, we'd all just stare at it for days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so I called up Will. I go, hey, I know you have that stereoscope for sale. And he's like, yeah, like sure, here, and it took me a couple months to pay it off because he was the type of guy. He's like, hey, like, just pay me monthly, like so like he was like, okay, here's $100 a month, and
Yeah.
we did that, and it turned out that was Rob Gibson's old camera. And like that's what I love about this world. There's so few of us, and everyone is so intertwined and connected. Like we just like a lens you have might been like someone else's lens they were shooting on 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like everyone, like there's so few of us that we're all connected, and I think that's what I love about this process so much is the people who are into it for, I think, the same reasons, or like they have the same feelings. And that's what keeps us all like this familiar family,
Yeah.
brother, sister type, feel to this work, and that's kind of what I love about it,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was really one of the things that kind of drove me to create this podcast, was just a way that we could actually learn more about the folks behind the camera, and hey, this is what they're doing. These are things that they've struggled with in the past. Hey, I had that same problem. Maybe I reach
Yeah.
out to that person and find out what they did to surmount that. So um, I agree. It is a small community. We always, or I always hear that there's about 1,000 people or so worldwide that are actually doing this process, and part of me wants to say, well, is there really even that many? I mean, people that
Yeah.
are actually doing this on a somewhat regular basis. I got to think it's probably less than that, but it'd be nice for somebody to do a poll, on one of
Yes.
these Facebook communities or something that says, okay, how many plates are you shooting, a month or a year? Is there some classification of a regular versus hey, I took a workshop and did a couple of plates and that was it, kind of thing.
Yeah. And one of the questions, like with what you just said there, like how many you do a year, like I called up Uline because every box or every image I make goes into a box. And I called up Uline. I asked them, how many boxes did I order this year? And I've actually gone through 950 boxes this year.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm not, I don't want to sound weird about that, but it blew my mind. I'm like, I did not, it's,
That's insane, and
yeah,
especially for the last few years. I mean, COVID really kind of put the brakes on being around folks and allowing people to get out and do this kind of things, because you're in people's faces when you're taking their portraits, and so to still be
yeah,
shooting that number of plates is pretty amazing.
yeah. And it was like during COVID, like 2 years ago in COVID, like every year I do Viva Las Vegas, which is a big rockabilly music festival, car festival. And during COVID, like we went there and everyone was masked up and it was a very light, people from Europe weren't there but everyone was in masks, everyone was far apart, and that was the first time getting back. I'm like, hey, I'm shooting again after a year of not shooting. And it was just like, it was great. Let's get back into this, and that whole feeling of like not being around people, I missed that so much, just and getting back into that. That was that first big job after COVID. And I'm getting ready for that one again in April. And it's, if you're ever out there into that type of music, it's a great festival.
So I guess just to swing us back around, I mean, if you had the chance to do an upgrade on your main shooting rig, would you do it or not?
I mean, I feel like I'm at the point where I have what I need. My main rig, no, I'll never. I'm happy with it. Like
Yeah.
if it, I just actually got my son a 3D printer, and I've been thinking like, what can I print with this for wet plate? And I've been working on making a good print of Robert's 8x10 and 5x7 print. His plate holders, because my thought was, I have a wet plate back but if that ever breaks, I can have the glass, the original 5x7 back, use that back. What I'm saying? Just have a backup,
Sure.
like,
Yep.
and for me, it's all about just having multiple backups because, you never know. I've had times when I dropped a rapid rectilinear lens and I was like, oh my gosh, what if that was like my good lens, like, um, I mean, a big thing I've been doing a lot or trying to do is shoot my 16x16 camera for landscapes, but it's a chore because it takes 3 gallons of silver.
Wow. Yep.
And like that's the hard part I have, like it's just getting that thing ready for portraiture. And that's my big upgrade. But then, buying a Pets full for that is ridiculous,
Oh, yeah.
like, but yeah, I think
same
that
boat. I spent some time during COVID trying to build a 24 inch by 24 inch camera that's got about a 1 meter extension on it, and I've got the camera all ready to go, and now I need to find a lens, right?
yes. Yeah, like a couple, I'd say about a year ago, like Tree Tran and I went out and we're shooting 20x24s with some models that I know, and they were like just shooting that big. It's hard, like to be able to move it. It's kind of clumsy-ish, like where everything else is so, you have the muscle memory, but when you start doing a plate that big, it's like, wow, this is, like, pouring 500 mils of collodion onto a plate is kind of interesting,
Right. Yep. There's
But
$80 of collodion that you're pouring out.
yes, don't spill it, But
Let's switch around to some personal goals. If you had the chance to photograph anyone that's alive today, who would it be?
I've been thinking about that for the last week since you sent me what we're going to talk about, and man, it's hard because I've shot. So last week I shot, or last month I shot Dick Metz, who's a 95-year-old surfer who, because of his, I was listening to the Surf Splendor podcast, and he was on there, and I listened to him, like, this guy is so amazing. Like, I got to go take his portrait. And I took his portrait, and his journeys actually, when he came home from a 3-year travel around the earth, his friend Bruce Brown decided to make the Endless Summer. And it's crazy because that was one of the films I saw as a kid that wanted me to get into surf photography.
Wow.
And then I'm sitting there, I'm like, I'm shooting the guy who in a way got me into photography without knowing about it, and he was if you can ever listen to that podcast, it's like or this Dick Metz's life, it's pretty interesting. Like I've shot, like, there's a lot of people I've shot where, like, I'm like, how was I ever able to shoot that person? Like, and they always just pop up. And I never want to say, like, who is the one person I'd want to shoot, because everyone in front of my camera is that person I want to shoot at that moment.
Yeah.
Like it to me, whether you're like the most famous person on earth or just a dude on the street, it doesn't matter to me. I want my goal is to make that person look their best.
Yep.
And I tell everyone, like, hey, right when they look at the picture, I go, if you don't like this, we'll reshoot it. Like, I don't want you walking away not happy. I don't want people knowing, like, hey, like, looking their best. And sometimes I fail at making that picture, and then we'll reshoot and they're happy, or, but so yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. And I do have some gigs I'm working on right now that if you see them come through this year, then you'll know that was one of the people I really wanted to shoot.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, I'm talking to their agents right now, and it's very much, kind of, in the talking stages right now.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. When I wrote this question, and I've asked a couple of people this now, I'm trying to think about who it would be for me. And honestly, as I look back at all of the, hundreds of photos that I've taken, some of the best ones, the ones that I just think are the most amazing, are complete strangers. There are people that don't have celebrity at all associated with them, but we were able to do something special. So,
yes. And like when you're on set and it's, a big set, and there's, like, lots of people running around, and you're working with someone who is like, it kind of makes me want to wish, like, hey, I wish I could just take that person and just be, like, more intimate. You know what I mean? Like, just let's be somewhere smaller,
Sure. Yeah.
Let's not have, like, the 100 people running around, or the 50 people, or the 10 people, or, like, I mean, and that's one of the hard parts too with doing pop-ups. Like, there's so many people, like, watching what you're doing because they're enthralled by it.
I mean, you being in California, I mean, you have access to the celebrity side of our lifestyle, right? And you definitely have access to those types of people, but still, I mean, to put that same level of priority on anybody that comes to your studio and sits down in the chair, I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, everyone needs to feel special whenever they get to be a sitter for this process, in my mind, because there are so few of us that are doing it now, that it's just not something that the typical person has access to today.
Yeah.
So, Conrad, tell me, is there an idea either for a particular plate or a series that you've got in mind that maybe you haven't had time to shoot yet? I mean, what's kind of on your creative agenda?
Okay, so after shooting Dick last month, I was sitting there just thinking, like, I really want to, like, get into the, like, interesting people, like people who've done, like, things that like, when you'd walk by, you'd have no idea who they are.
Okay.
And I have a couple of friends that I've already contacted with, and done some portraits for this book as well. And what it is like I had a buddy whose dad built 180-foot tall ship, and they lived on it for 10 years, and then they sold it, and now he bought a 1909 Buick Racer, and my buddy Dennis raced from Mexico to Canada in this 1909 Buick. And like, so like I wanted to do more like a series of like just normal people who've done extraordinary things or weird things that, you would never look at that person and go, hey, that guy's like, you know, some, I mean,
Oh
someone
yeah,
different,
that's
and
exactly what you're talking about.
or yeah, or like, like who's this old guy who, like I had a neighbor, he died during COVID and he was 99 years old. And I kept asking him, hey, let me do your portrait, because he was a World War II bomber pilot in the Pacific. And he would never let me do his portrait. He's like, no one wants to see me old. And when I die, I die, And I'm like, no, but I want to take your portrait. And after he passed, I felt really like sad, because like I never got his portrait. My grandma, her portrait is one of my prized possessions of portraiture, of photography, because I shot it 3 months before she died. And she just, she had Alzheimer's at the time and was just, you know, barely holding on. And like those are the types of things for me. Like I just want to be able to create more things that people can hold on, like, and have hundreds of years from now.
Right.
And it's something interesting. I was actually listening to your first podcast with Shane, and you guys were talking about like finding fun things in the union cases. And
Yes.
my second my second union case I opened up, there was a receipt in it for 35 apple trees, and it was dated 1862.
Wow.
And like it to me, that was just like, I'm like, holy cow. Like when I saw that one, I was like, this is neat, like. And I didn't really ever think about like, hey, who could this guy be? I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's like an antique of an antique.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you were talking about, like, hey, I could possibly find who his descendants are. Last year, I was looking in Tazewell, Virginia, where my grandfather was from, and I found on eBay, I bought a portrait, and it was actually my grandpa's cousins.
Okay.
And it's an 8x10 album imprint.
I think it's pretty amazing that when someone that's alive today is able to go back more than about 3 or 4 generations and find those photos. I kind of got into genealogy here over the last few years, and it's amazing how much information is lost. Once you go back more than, your second great grandparents or whatever, you have no idea who those people were, what they look like, anything about them. And to be able to find photos that actually have your family on them, I think it's definitely a treasure, right?
Well, and it's interesting too how closely related, like, people like, we're all related, whatever, but like I find some people I know, like, we can trace back 10 generations. Like, oh, we're like fifth cousins, or, third, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then I have other people like, oh, I'm not related to you at all. Like when you're hunting that genealogy stuff down, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think just to go back to your neighbor that was the World War II veteran. I mean, I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize is they have a story that's very unique, right?
Yeah.
And I say this because I was able to set up at a VFW post here a few years ago and actually take some shots of some World War II veterans. And to be honest, taking the photographs for me was almost secondary. It was sitting down with them and hearing their story, right? Listening to their experiences. Just amazing that they were normal, everyday people, but they were put into these extraordinary circumstances. And man, those are the folks we need to go out and get their stories, capture those images.
And now you're having to like find the Korean War guys because they're now in their 90s, and if you find any World War II vet left, they're in their late 90s, early hundreds. But like it's kind of interesting because like when we were kids in the 80s, 90s, it's like the World War II vets were 60s, 70s,
Right.
80s for the older guys. But now it's like, time just keeps marching. And I think that's, back to Jackson's book, he talked a lot about that in his book, like, when he was one of the last Civil War veterans alive. Now, you asked me a question earlier, like what would be like my dream, like person, or I kind of think like my dream project.
Okay.
And I hope someone does this and I would love to do it, but if someone does, like, I hope you do it. But what it is to actually make a landscape in every national park and then create a book out of it.
Wow.
And there's 52 parks or in the continental United States, you know what I mean? Like, you can't get out to Guam. Not Guam. Oh, yeah, I think it is Guam. There's a national
couple
park
of them out there that are kind of tough. I know there's at least one or two in Alaska that you got to actually fly into. You can't even get there by road.
Yeah.
So.
And I thought about this years ago to do that, and it's Glacier National Park right by you. That's like those lakes up there are beautiful. Like the there's that whole route you can do and hit every single one, but it's like such a that's like a 4-month project to do every single one.
Sounds like it's ripe for the taking.
Yes, it is. I hope someone can do it. Like if you do, give me credit. Anyway, just joking. No,
I think you're the guy, Conrad. I mean,
I could do it. Yeah.
Whenever you stop by Rocky Mountain National Park, it's only 45 minutes away from my house. So please stop by.
I will. I mean, last time I was in Fort Collins was in the 90s. So it was a while back.
Yeah. As we're kind of nearing towards the end here, who are some of those photographers that are around today that, or maybe they're not, that you kind of look up to, that have been mentors, being able to work with Will, that lived an hour away from you whenever he was around. I mean, what an amazing resource for you to have access to.
Yeah.
Who are some of the folks that inspire your work today?
Well, I mean, Will, like, even when Will moved up to Yosemite, that was amazing. But yeah, like Will, Bob Zabo's amazing. Luther's rad. I have, my first photography mentors, Don and Jay Romero, were amazing. Then I did a lot of work with my buddy Kwong Lee. He was one of those guys that just like totally blew my mind. Like, we'd be on set and be like, this is when I was assisting for him. Just see, like, I don't know. But a lot of the people I really like, beside mentors, but just really look into like their photography, who I think pushed me landscape wise, would be like Win Bullock. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
No, nope.
Yeah, he was like 50s and he started getting into some really amazing color work, but his black and white stuff is just amazing. There's also like for anyone out there, like there's a book you can get on Amazon called Victorian Giants and the Birth of Art Photography.
Interesting. Okay.
And, and that's a good one to like, just kind of like read and just look at people's portraits, like, and see, like, because that's a lot of times what I'm trying to do. And I feel like I fail at is like get more into like the Renaissance portraiture. Cause like those guys really studied, and that's who the guys 150 years ago were studying, was all the, older portraits that were paintings.
Right. Yep.
And like, why use Rembrandt lighting? Why use, flat lighting? What's the point of the lighting you're using? Like why did I use a Speedotron with a 48OC? I do that because I can shoot, at a 5.6 to an f8, like it, and get more depth, but on an 8x10, I still only have like a couple millimeters, with that same light. Like, what's the point? Like, why get stuck, just making a picture when you can push it a little bit more? And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is how do I continue to push my work further? That I'm not just trying to understand the chemicals, but then actually creating new art to be able to, be better, or push this beyond what I did, the week before.
Right. I love to hear what has inspired other folks, just because those can be inspirations to more people, right?
Yes.
Look into those different artists that are out there. What kind of advice do you have for the folks that are listening to this that are maybe struggling with their plates? Maybe they're just getting started. Maybe they've been doing it for a while and they're just kind of stuck in a rut. They're doing the same thing. What kind of advice do you have for those folks?
So there's times when I feel like I'm stuck in a rut, and every time like I stop, sit back, reach out to someone I know, you know, change one thing at a time. Don't try to, like think everything's something that it isn't. Just do, like listen to what people have to say who've been doing this for a while. Like if you're on a Facebook forum and they say, "Hey, clean your silver," a lot of times that's the main thing that's really wrong, or it could be a light leak or whatever it is, but just don't stop. Just keep going, keep moving. Like, you know, maybe you just need a different, maybe you mess something up in your chemistry and you just need to start over. Don't be afraid to start over. Don't think that batch of silver is the most precious thing. Like I have a lot of silver. I've actually taken silver nitrate and all my cotton balls and convert it into powdered silver with copper, because I know if that bath was so polluted, I couldn't fix it. And it had ruined my plates for like a couple months. And instead of, I look at all the time I lost, trying to save $100 bath,
Yeah.
And it sounds like, I feel, I'm not trying to be like, whatever, $100 bath, but the amount of time that people could be stuck on a problem if they just like step back and realize that like you need to look at a different angle, and maybe you can fix it. And also too, like, I'm teaching a guy a workshop. He called me up last week saying, "Hey, let's do a workshop." And I said, "Sure, let's do it." Reach out to people who have been out there longer. I mean, we've all been there, and everyone that I've met in this circle has been very helpful. Like or try. Like I think people are very generous here. It's not like a cutthroat, mechanic thing where everyone or construction thing where everyone's like out to get everyone else.
Yeah.
Like I feel like everyone here, like I think a more open group of people,
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's been my typical experience.
Yeah.
I know that there's others that maybe have not had that experience, but I think there's people out there that are willing to help. If you just reach out, there'll be someone that will give you some guidance, right?
Yep. I mean, and not everyone's gonna, you're not gonna rub everyone the right way. They're not gonna rub you the right way, but you'll always find someone there who might be the same cloth. You know what I'm saying? Like, or the same who you get along with better, who can help you. You know what I mean? Like, it's all. I don't know that sounds kind of stupid.
No, I mean, different personalities got to mesh with different folks, right? And
yes,
I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yes. You asked about like any advice for people. I would say don't get stuck on thinking you need like the biggest, most amazing lens or the camera. Like that's not you in your photography. Find like you can make this on Holgos. You can do this on any kind of box camera. Like to start out, just get there and start going. We're lucky enough now where we have like Brian at UVP who'll make you a collodion. If you want to start, just start. It's not like where you're mixing all the collodions and everything up by hand and needing to know how to do that right away. Just do it.
That's great advice.
Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Just talk. Just like figure out. Just do it. There shouldn't be anything stopping anybody. If I listened to everyone who ever said don't do something, I'd be stuck. I'd still be like working a 9-to-5 job, or doing construction or whatever, whatever it is, but that art pushed and pushed. And like the real thing with wet plate is you have to put the hours, like I look at the mistakes I was making the first 2 years, and that when we all look back, like, oh my gosh, we all made those same mistakes,
Yep. I
and
think it comes down to practice for sure. I mean,
yeah,
you can't expect to shoot 5 plates and have it mastered by the time you get to the end of it, right?
no, and that's the thing, like it's you know, I think it takes like that whole 10,000 hour thing, like it really, like when I was starting out, okay, the advice I have for somebody who is starting out is go shoot. Make as many plates as you can.
Yep.
And just keep going. And if you're stuck, ask somebody and just keep going. Don't stop. Like this is something that down the line, you'll look back and go, okay, that was a little mistake. I get it now. Like I have a lot of times now where I look at plates and like, I want to make the perfect plate, the perfect plate, the perfect plate. And then all my clients are going like, I want them to be messy and junky. Like and I'm sitting there going like,
Yeah.
I'm like, let's reshoot that. There's like a little bit of, developer mark right there. I'm like,
Yeah.
and they want to see that though, because to them, that's what wet plate is.
Right.
So then I decided going, okay, I'm going to make the plate how it is. And then it's going to be very, more fluid. If I, like move my wrist a little ways and the developer moves the wrong way, whatever, but there comes a point where you work up to that point and then it's like, okay, now I can do what I want more for art's sake,
Right. Nope. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, Conrad, how do people that want to see your work get a hold of you? What's the best way? It sounds like you're still doing portraits. Do you have a way that they can reach out to you and check out your work and maybe get set up to come to your studio?
Okay, so to get a hold of me, it's either Instagram or my website, and both of them are Conrad Film. Also starting that whole TikTok thing, and but that's pretty in the infancy right now.
Are you making daily TikToks?
No, I'm making like monthly. I should be, but I have the hardest time doing reels on Instagram, and there's some people out there that are amazing at it. But no, it's all pretty much just Instagram and my website.
Great. Well, Conrad, thanks for being a guest on the podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time to join up with me here and just have a conversation. And again, hopefully this has some meaning to some folks that are out there looking for some inspiration, or maybe they'll reach out to you and get some direct mentorship from you. So,
well, thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
And when you come out to San Diego, you got to come visit me. I'd love to make some portraits, or if I get up your way,
Excellent. Yeah, I was going to say for sure, anytime that if you happen to be in the neighborhood, swing by and we'll definitely make some plates.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Thanks, Conrad.
Cool. You're welcome.
Thanks. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wet plate journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 questions with any feedback. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests, and I look forward to you joining me again in the coming weeks for a new episode of 10 Questions.